thieves dressed as Boston policemen broke into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum early Sunday
wore
morning.
police uniforms and
Museum
fooled the
officials
security
today
guards.
said it was the largest art heist in history.
The thieves went directly for Storm in the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt. And it makes sense. Rembrandt is the target of all major art thieves. When you talk about people who are stealing art because they think they're going to make a lot of money with it, Rembrandt's the first name that comes to mind. This is one people think about all the time. It's Rembrandt's only seascape, his only known seascape. So you can imagine what the value of this incredibly large, unique, and moving painting would be. At the center of the picture, but beneath dead center, you see one figure just holding a rope and holding his hat on his head, and it's Rembrandt.
I was so young when I painted this. I really had no idea how true it was going to be. Life is a storm. One minute the sea's flat calm, and then the next it's not, and the doubters shout abandon ship. I never listened. It's the art that matters, not the mess and loss and sorrow. Here I am.
One of the great ironies, of course, is that his works of art are so highly sought after, not just by thieves, but by collectors, of course, and the values are astronomical. But he died in obscurity. When he passed away, his friends had to gather money together to bury him, and he was buried in a rented grave, which means after a period of time his remains would be moved, and it's a mystery as to where those remains are today. So we don't know where these works are, and we don't know where Rembrandt's remains are either. So it's sort of a parallel mystery.
This is Rembrandt's last self-portrait, painted in 1669, the year he died. He's looking at you, of course, and it's a picture full of the artist and of his life and of his achievements and his failures and of his art.
You see a certain kind of hardship that he's been through, a certain kind of struggle. And of course, at the end of his life, he is financially not doing well. But I think you still see the beauty and power and dignity of a man who's worked his whole life on a great project, which is to be Rembrandt.
Big nose. He's asking us to look at him. It's almost as if he's asking us not to forget him.
This is Rembrandt shortly after he moved to Amsterdam. He's establishing himself, and so there's a sense of an identity still forming, ambitious and trying and hopeful and open. And he's trying to be someone. Rembrandt is consumed with self-portraiture throughout his entire career. And we get a sense of him as a man, as an artist, in all of these different ways. And this is a Rembrandt who is playing with costume, who is dressed here in something that a scholar would have worn in the 16th century, wearing a beret, which is unfashionable at this point in time. There's, for Rembrandt, this quality, too, of marketing himself, having a business and selling yourself. And that's also something Rembrandt was very conscious of.
Amsterdam is mine. There's no better place for me. It's awash with new money, profits from trade with every country on earth. It's my promised land. There are people here who've been rich 5 minutes and want to live like princes. They want good art, and I'm here to paint it. My door's the only door they should knock on.
Amsterdam was at that moment the most important art market in Europe. I mean, if you want to buy a painting or a print, you go to Amsterdam. Artists started to specialize as well, to find their own niche within this market. And people could become a specialist in portrait painting, for example, or landscape painting, or landscapes with winter scenes, or landscapes with winter scenes and a windmill at the right-hand side of the composition. I mean, it was this very, unbelievable specialization going on. And then it's interesting to see what Rembrandt's doing, since he didn't specialize. So he went to all these different genres, and he became one of the greatest masters in every genre he touched on.
I'll paint your portrait, if you're rich enough. I'll paint group portraits too, 50 guilders a face. The more the merrier. I'll paint Christ on the cross and off it. I'll paint scenes from the Old Testament. I'll paint scenes from Greek mythology. I'll paint anything, as long as someone pays. And if you can't afford a painting, I'm not just a painter.
For most people, Rembrandt is a painter, but it's only part of the story. Besides his paintings, he made an incredible lot of etchings, and the number of etchings that he made is actually as high as his painting. So it's not an inferior sideline, it's in the core of what he did. As a printmaker, he is a genius. Rembrandt has been making self-portraits right from the start, which is also something that you were supposed to do as an artist. If you want to know how to draw and etch and paint a face, start on your own. These are the self-portraits with the faces, practicing emotions, laughing, and then we have here the angry face. These are famous, and rightly so, and in this case where he's surprised and he looks like he's retrieving backwards, this is a beautiful depiction of surprise, and it's very lightly etched. This is just right in every possible way. This is also the period where he just couldn't get enough of what he saw in the streets, whether they were beggars or peddlers or peasants or street musicians. This is another one. It's a beggar, and he is holding out his hand, and again, that's something that Rembrandt in this period liked. He is vocal. He is shouting at us or saying something. But the most intriguing part of this etching, beggar, is that the beggar has Rembrandt's face. It's still difficult to interpret whether he really meant something by it other than I can do this, and it's fun to do.
I can make anything. Portraits of the wealthy, etchings of the poor. Everything I see is worth some sort of picture. I know some people keep diaries and accounts, but that's not what my eyes and fingers are for. Why write things down? I'm not here to explain myself to anyone.
Rembrandt, he didn't leave us many documents that he wrote himself. But if you look at these archives here in Amsterdam, we have actually hundreds of documents where, in one way or another, his name is mentioned in a positive way, in a negative way, financially, about his art. This building is full with Rembrandt. So here I have a document dated June 20, 1631. I think it's one of the earliest, maybe the earliest document in Amsterdam where Rembrandt is mentioned. Here is his first contact with Hendrick Uylenburgh, the art dealer. This is the moment that he comes to Amsterdam and starts his career as a painter in Amsterdam. Yeah, absolutely.
Uylenburgh's studios were on the Breestraat, beside the canal. He knew everybody. He was my introduction. He was like a ladder I could climb. I went in through his doors, and the story of my Amsterdam began.
The book was actually a commission. It was commissioned by the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, which probably has the biggest collection of the world of Rembrandt. I based a lot of his experience compared to mine, and even Rembrandt's face, I based it partially on the face of my father. He also had a really big plump nose and that sort of melancholy look. The idea I had of him, he was not a very outgoing person, to say the least, almost verging on the autistic. And the traditional image of the artist expressing himself through his art better than in his social life, I really embraced that idea. I think that really goes for Rembrandt. This is the part where he first meets Saskia, which I believe is the love of his life. It starts off in 1631. Rembrandt's still a young man and not very well known. So he comes to Amsterdam for the very first time. He carries his own luggage through the streets of Amsterdam, and he's directed to the gallery of Mr. Uylenburgh. And then he shows him around, but Rembrandt isn't really listening, and he sees something through the door they pass. And then we see what Rembrandt sees, and it's a young girl doing her hair, and she hears her uncle and Rembrandt talk. Her uncle asks for 2 glasses of chilled wine. We're celebrating. Yes, Uncle Hendrick. And then she comes back and her hair is all done up and pretty, and she's made up her face and wearing her best earrings. And her uncle doesn't notice any of this, of course, but Rembrandt only has eyes for her.
Life surprises us. I'd come to Amsterdam to make something of myself, and suddenly there she was, my reason, someone to aim for. But she came from a family of burgomasters, far too upper class for me. If I asked for her hand today, her family would laugh, which only makes it all the more urgent that I become the most famous and successful artist in the entire city.
I think he was very passionate, of course, that he loved women. Probably one of these people who walks into a room and you feel their presence. He was probably very demanding and very busy. I mean, he must have been working all the time, just constantly making new things, thinking about new things, sketching, drawing, painting.
I think what's brilliant here is the composition, this sort of triangular composition with these, the figures in very dynamic positions. The prominence of Dr. Tulp here on the right with the hat and the slightly sort of cool flesh paint of the corpse contrasted against the crisp white of the doctors. He spent a lot of time drawing from nature, observing people, observing emotions. And you can actually, when you look at each of these figures, you, in a way, recognize their humanity. We see the signature in the background of the painting. He signed it Rembrandt, 1632. So it says a lot about his ambition at this point, whether there were precedents from Italian painters who were using, one name. But obviously, I think that's the impression you get, that it's very much to do with his ambition as a young painter.
If one name's good enough for Michelangelo and Raphael, it's good enough for me. I'm Rembrandt. This work is a masterpiece. It's my first group portrait of one of Amsterdam's guilds. I've captured the ways in which the guildsmen understand, or are mystified, bemused, fascinated. Not just their faces, but their minds.
It was an opportunity for him to really show off what he had to offer, and not just in, technical skill, but also in this sort of grand vision of who he was as a painter as well. In a sense, what's happening right in the center of the picture is all about hands. Not only the hand of the man on the table, the doctor pulling the arm so to show us how the hand moves, and also the hand of the artist.
I'm a hand surgeon here in the Netherlands, and what we are looking at here is a magnificent group portrait, of course. So this is really depicting the birth of our profession, because before that, let's say in the Middle Ages, we had a guild that was consistent of barbers that also did a little bit of medical stuff, and that was about it. And so now we are entering a new era where science is emerging. So this guild is really something else. They were real surgeons. They could do something. They were looking at how the body works. They were opening up the body. There are some flaws in it, actually. And first of all, there is a tendon of the pinky, which isn't there in reality. But the biggest mistake in the picture is that the origin of these superficial flexor tendons is on the medial epicondyle of the elbow and not on the lateral one. So it's really a mistake he made, but I forgive him for that.
I adore this painting. When you see the technical virtuosity of the artist's hand at such an early age, at the outset of his career, you're amazed. It's almost as if you could see people saying, where did this young man come from?
Where did I come from? Leiden, a small town, a day's ride from Amsterdam. I was the 6th of 7 children, born in 1606, and my father's mill served the brewery trade. We weren't rich, we weren't poor, we were somewhere in between, quite comfortable. I wasn't interested in malting barley. I was interested in painting. I had a friend, younger than me, but he'd been master of his own studio since he was 12. Jan Lievens. I wanted to be like him, better than him. And a 6th child doesn't really matter, so they let me study art.
The Leiden collection itself was named as an homage to Rembrandt and to his hometown. It was built out of tremendous passion for Rembrandt and his school. And from the time that we started collecting, my wife and I realized that we simply could not live with these paintings, that they were meant to be seen. We made it known to the museums that all of our paintings were available to be on loan. Within the study of Rembrandt and his school, there is a very special place to be had by what would best be described as the friendly rivalry between Rembrandt and Lievens. They had a true and genuine connection, a true appreciation for each other. We saw this in the Leiden period where, within one of our paintings, for example, The Sense of Hearing, Rembrandt paints as a central figure Lievens. We see within Lievens' painting of the card players, the central figure is Rembrandt.
I followed in Jan's footsteps as far as I could. I went to train with the same master he had, and when I got home to Leiden, we started painting together. Or rather, painting at each other.
Looking at this portrait of Rembrandt by Jan Lievens, it's becoming clear how much they looked at each other and how much they learned from each other's techniques as well.
Rembrandt, when he's young and he works in Leiden, he works on a tiny scale. And obviously, one is oneself most patient sitter. So what does he do? He starts to study himself. The amazing thing is he leaves the most important part of a face, the eyes, in the shadow, which nobody does when you paint a portrait. He creates very convincingly the light in his hair. And there he uses a technique that Lievens probably developed, because Lievens, although a year younger than Rembrandt, working in the same city, had already finished his training before, and he probably developed this scratching with the back of his brush to create light.
The way he's scratching into the wet paint, I mean, no one had ever done that before. And now both Rembrandt and Lievens are showing in these paintings, well, how they can use this new technique to give more life to their faces and to their composition. It's like today's soccer players, if I may make that comparison. And sometimes you need the best players in the world to play in one soccer team, and all of a sudden the whole team's becoming better. And that's what's happening here as well. So they really encourage each other to get to a higher level. That's magnificent, I think.
I learnt from Jan, and I taught him things. He retouched my paintings and told me he'd improved them, and I did the same for him. In this picture, I don't think I ever decided which of us it was behind the easel. I think in those days, sometimes, people couldn't tell which of us had painted what.
Sometimes there is the suggestion, because they were rivals, that they were also quarreling, but that's not the case. I think they're just collaborating and doing things for each other. The story of this painting is complex, first of all. The painting was just 5 minutes in my studio, and then I found a date, 1627, which nobody had ever seen. I put it on the easel and looked at it for a few days, and my first conclusion was based on looking at the coat of the old man. What I see here is not by Rembrandt, but that's by Lievens. But how is that possible if there is not only a date at the bottom left, but also a signature, a reliable signature, RHL, exactly in the way Rembrandt signed in 27. And it's good to realize that Rembrandt only signs a painting when it's finished. To make a very long story very short is that we found out that the painting was entirely finished by Rembrandt, but it was a very dark painting. It was sent back to the painter. Lievens brought light in a dark painting. So everything that is, almost everything that is lit very strong, this wall, the sky, this part, the wall here, the wood, and the top of the chair. That's all done by Lievens. Then Gerard Douw painted this blue cloth and this dish. And of course, this silk strip. Gerard Douw, by the way, was the first pupil of Rembrandt.
Yes, we already had pupils, both Jan and I. We weren't nobodies anymore. I liked Hendrick. He was a feather in my cap.
Rembrandt started it, finished it. It was probably too dark. Lievens brought light in it, and Gerard Douw made a unity of the painting. That's the basic story. The manners of painting was so close that it was easily mixed up, and I think they took advantage of it.
We had a visitor come to Leiden in 1628, a leading connoisseur. Constantin Huygens. He was impressed by us both, commissioned Jan to make a portrait of him. And Huygens told me that my Judas Repentant was more truthful, more powerful than anything the Italian masters had ever painted. I agreed, and then he left, various promises floating in the air. And I began to think about how small Leiden was, and about Amsterdam and money, and the art that I would turn it into.
Well, we are looking at Rembrandt not yet 23 years old. This is 1628, perhaps very early in 1629. And this is early days in his career, but you can see he's full of ambition. You know, if you look at him wearing this gold chain, which is quite telling, he certainly would have known that some famous artists, past and present, such as Titian and Rubens, would have been given gold chains by kings and princes. And that seems to be the message here, the aspiration here. I am worth a gold chain. And if not now, then certainly in the future.
This is an extremely exciting moment for a collector. This will be only the third time that I've seen this painting in 15 years. It will be the first time that I will have seen it cleaned. This is for us the jewel in the crown. It has been the Holy Grail for the last 15 years, and I can't wait to see it. It really is sublime. I can't really speak. It makes my heart pound. There's something about the signature and the date, the size, the prominence relative to, of course, the size of the painting, which is, after all, his smallest. It would have been so easy, especially in view of the size of the artwork, to just initial it. No. He recognizes himself that he has created a jewel. The beholder would have looked upon this and said, he's a genius. He's on a trajectory, the likes of which no other Dutch painter embarked upon at that time. He's going to be more famous than any other Dutch artist ever. And it all goes to show that he must have hit Amsterdam like a thunderclap.
At the time when Rembrandt paints these portraits, he's made a stellar career in Leiden, arrives in Amsterdam and becomes very soon the most fashionable and probably also the most expensive portrait painter in the city. Usually he paints portraits either half-length or just bust-length, but here he paints Martin and Opium full length, as if they're royalty and not just very rich commoners. And Rembrandt gives every detail, every shine to the costume that one can imagine. The part that you really want to touch, literally, are these rosettes on the shoes of Martin. She also is incredibly elaborate, fantastic embroidery, and you feel that she's really the boss in the household.
These portraits are a ticklish affair. People I paint for, most of them, have no idea what great art is. They just want me to make them look good. And they want me to make them look rich. They want them to hang on their walls, show their parents, show their kids, and their posterity. Even onto the 7th generation. These were your great-great-grandparents. Look how rich they were. So I pay as much attention to the lace as the face. I give them good cuffs and collars.
He depends on these people because they are the ones who give him commissions, so they are the ones who then, provide him with a salary. What they wanted is the best of the best, and they could afford it. And why could they afford it? Because they were all merchants and traders, and they got really, really wealthy. So basically they want to flaunt it because the money is there. We were led to believe that black was really frugal, and it meant that, you know, our ancestors in the 17th century were really frugal people. Well, nothing speaks of that, even if you look at the accounts, if you look at the probate inventories, no frugality whatsoever, because black was the most difficult color to dye.
This is one of Rembrandt's first formal self-portraits. It was about dress and about showing that you're very successful and can afford expensive clothes. But he still, even here, he continues to display himself in roles. This is another role of his, successful gentleman or the successful artist role. This is really something where he proclaims his success. He was, in a way, saying, "Come to me."
Portraits pay the rent, but they're not what I want to be famous for. I want to be the best and most admired kind of painter there is, a history painter. Take scenes from the Bible or Roman times and paint them so powerfully that viewers almost think they're there. Better than a landscape painter, better than a portraitist. The history painter does everything they do and brings drama to it all. And thanks to my patron, Constantin Huygens, just such an opportunity falls in my lap.
It's two pictures, part of a series that Rembrandt was intended to make for the stadtholder, which was the most important, let's say, leader of state in the Dutch Republic in the 17th century. And this was a very prestigious commission. It was Constantin Huygens again, who was the most important, well, let's say, intermediate figure between Rembrandt and the stadtholder.
The painting seems to include a self-portrait of Rembrandt at the base of the cross. So he is one of the people guilty, so to speak, of crucifying Christ. And that insertion of his own self-portrait as a kind of confessional of sin or participation in these holy events was really extraordinary.
Every sin we commit is another injury inflicted on his broken body. It's true of me as much as anyone else, and I paint Christ's body as a ruin, because he was a man as well as God and died for us. This is the kind of painting I was made for. So I'll take my time.
The series of paintings were commissioned in the early 1630s, and Rembrandt took several years before he completed them. One might think that having such a prominent patron on the national stage would have been Rembrandt's first priority, but clearly it wasn't at that point in his career.
We see him acting all the time as a kind of disruptor and someone who exactly knows what he wants to do and someone who does not necessarily follow the demands of the commissioners. So looking at a commission like this, apparently it's not the money that's important to him, but it's the final result. And it's only Rembrandt himself who decides what's good and what's not good.
It may well have been because he was simply too busy with other commissions right at hand. He wanted to ingratiate himself with clientele in the city of Amsterdam who were paying him quite a lot of money for portraits and buying other types of pictures as well. He was running a large studio. He was engaged to be married.
I'm far from penniless. I'm doing well. So I ask her uncle Uylenburgh for Saskia's hand in marriage. And I draw her on the 8th of June, 1633, the third day after our engagement. She's 21 years old, and she's mine. I paint her as herself and other people. No need to flatter if you truly love. I'll paint her as the goddess Flora, pagan goddess of fertility, because we want our union blessed. I'll paint myself as the prodigal son and her as my whore because I love her. And because there's a market for morality tales. So we sell and we spend. Life is good.
In the beginning of his career in Amsterdam, Rembrandt bought things at auctions. And he bought a lot. This is, of course, a time where he makes very nice paintings for very rich people.
A drawing by Adrian Brouwer, less than 2 guilders. That's not too much.
The first documented purchases that we have are of works of art, and specifically prints.
Rembrandt collects art on a grand scale. We know that he had an incredible collection of prints. One of his favorite artists was Lucas van Leyden. Lucas, like him, came from Leiden and was a predecessor, and both a very good printmaker and a very good painter.
This is 1637, March, and he bought for the immense amount of 637 guilders an art book from Lucas van Leyden. This is really an enormous amount of money.
That's the kind of thing that was so outrageous that people would remember it for decades.
A couple of half-length portraits should cover it. Anyway, it's what it's worth.
Prints by Albrecht Dürer show up, and he's buying those in quantities.
7 complete sets of Dürer's Life of the Virgin, 12 guilders. Bargain!
He's pursuing stuffed animals.
I mean, going to auctions can become a habit.
He's buying Oriental exotica, such as a Japanese helmet. He has, of course, his busts of the emperors, some of them in plaster, but he also has Venetian glass.
And he buys, and he buys, and he buys.
I buy things that I might copy in a picture. Some seashells, God's handiwork. Beautiful.
As we say, he had a hole in his hand. He was spending all of the time, and he had no real idea of money, I think.
Of course it adds up.
Saskia's family accuse me of squandering her dowry, so I sue them for slander. The judge threw the case out. Idiot. It wasn't my name I was defending. It was my purpose. Almost everything I buy ends up in one of my pictures, like almost everything I see. The world God made, and all the men and creatures in it.
In 1637, Rembrandt goes to the fall fair, and there's the attraction of the year, an elephant, an Asian elephant. She is 7 years old, and her name is Hansken, and she's traveling the world. So a real must-see for an artist like Rembrandt, because he was fascinated by the creation, by everything which was alive, and it was important for him as an artist to see animals in the flesh. He draws her. A year later, he uses her in an etching. He etches Adam and Eve in paradise, and where normally we see Adam and Eve surrounded by a huge variety of species, like a zoo, Rembrandt chooses to depict only 2 creatures. One is fantasy, a dragon, and the other is an elephant, and it's Hansken. So the buyers of this print must have understood that this was Hansken, and maybe they had seen her themselves also.
God made the world. I believe it, even though I'm no churchgoer. It's from the Bible that I take so many of the stories that I tell. Fit subjects for etchings and for paintings too. The turning points of history. The fall of man. the fall of pagan kings.
You see his ambition here as a history painter. He paints a biblical story, one of the highly dramatic Old Testament stories, Belshazzar's feast. You remember is this story of Belshazzar giving a big feast and using the sacred vessels his father looted from the temple in Jerusalem. So it's a sacrilege here. And then at the height of the feast, the writing appears on the wall, which ultimately means you are going to die and your kingdom will perish. In a way, Belshazzar is sort of the hinge here, you know? So it's the writing on the wall appearing, him noticing this and reacting to it, and then the others pick that up, that something is happening. They haven't realized yet what it is, it seems, but because he reacts to it, they are also sort of reacting to him.
Other artists paint the aftermath, but the moments I look for are the turning points. The king startles, the drink is spilt, and the others know only that their great king is suddenly unmanned. Pride goes before a fall.
Rembrandt didn't spend only money on prints and paintings and props, but Rembrandt also wanted to live somewhere permanently. And that's why in 1639 he goes to the notary, and together with two other guys who own a house in the Breestraat, and this is the contract. They sell and Rembrandt he buys.
Rembrandt bought the house for 13,000 guilders. Difficult to translate into today's money, but I mean more than €1 million probably. So a very expensive house. And we also know that he could afford it. He was doing very well. Rembrandt was able to put down a down payment, and the rest of the amount he was allowed to pay in installments, very much like we pay our mortgages these days. It was a beautiful house. There were 5 floors if you include the cellars and the attics that were used. So he was able to do a lot here, not only his own studio, but also a studio for his pupils. He was able to receive patrons and commissioners, and there was also space for his beautiful collection of art and curiosities. So space enough, and it was a house in grand style with great lighting. What more would you want as a painter?
It is an enormous amount of money, 13,000 guilders for a house. But as long as Rembrandt did not pay the full amount of money, it was not his house officially.
It's perfect. Plenty of room for everything. Pictures, people. But then there's the matter of the cash. I do have it, in a manner of speaking. I've finished the passion paintings for the stadtholder. That means money, once he's paid. I should get in touch with Huygens and let him know.
So Rembrandt writes to Constantine Huygens. The letters are cordial. They communicate a desire to serve his patron, but he's also looking for payment. And he wants to get paid quickly. He would like to be paid, interestingly enough, more than the original agreement seems to have been.
My dear sir, I have taken great pleasure in the proper execution of the paintings of Christ's entombment and his resurrection by His Highness the Stadtholder, and they will bring His Highness pleasure, for in these 2 pictures I have observed the deepest and most natural emotion. I'm now sending you these 2 pieces, which I think are fine enough to warrant His Highness paying me no less than 1,000 guilders for each of them. I rely on his knowledge and discretion.
Should Rembrandt have asked for more money from Constantine Huygens? That's a good question. He is following a model of princely patronage, whereby in asking for more money, he is appealing to Huygens' taste. He is saying, essentially, if you recognize good art, you'll be willing to pay for it, and pay more for it. Huygens doesn't seem to have agreed and wanted to stick to their original price. The letters show some signs of strain in their relationship.
If His Highness cannot be persuaded to pay a higher price, even if they are obviously worth it, I shall be content with 600 guilders apiece, provided I am reimbursed for my cash outlay of 44 guilders for the 2 ebony frames and the crate. Your obliging and affectionate servant, Rembrandt.
Rembrandt and money. That's a complicated thing. He was really economically aware of his own value and what he could earn and what he should ask. But he was also aware of the value of art and was prepared to really pay huge sums to acquire that. I feel that for Rembrandt, making art or painting, making prints, drawing was more of a calling than an economic activity. He just needed to do that.
People mistake me. They think I'm greedy because they think that art is a craft, a job, a way of making a living. No, 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 no. You won't understand me if that's the way you think. Life is a means of making art. That's the right way around. That's why a house like this, there's room to live, room for my own studio, room to teach. And yes, of course, the pupils pay for the privilege.
We're now in the space that Rembrandt called his small painting room. This was actually his pupils' atelier. He kept his pupils separate from his own space. We have biographers like Joachim von Sandrart writing fairly early about Rembrandt's studio, where he may have had a peek when he was here in the 1630s. We notice that these people have their own agendas. And he sees Rembrandt as a mercenary, and he also points to all of these pupils. And he actually calculates how much income Rembrandt would have had from these pupils. It's over 2,000 guilders per year. He can't believe the sum. So it may or may not have been true, but it does tell us that part of the criticism of Rembrandt was that he was in it for the money and people didn't understand his aim and why he painted and drew the way he did. The pupils had various tasks, and in this alcove, we've reconstructed the very important activity of creating a copy after one of Rembrandt's paintings. We have our own copy of Rembrandt's The Angel Departing from Tobias and His Family, now in the Louvre, and we show how an artist would have started the painting. Rembrandt could have then perhaps touched these up. We also have stories of his pupils producing paintings that were so close to the master's style that people couldn't distinguish, and they were actually sold as works by Rembrandt, which was fair game. After all, it was produced at Rembrandt's behest, under his supervision, in his style, and other artists worked much in the same way. And of course, it was all too tempting for later sellers to fudge the part about the pupil and to emphasize the part about the master. And by the 19th century, there were scattered throughout collections in Europe and in other areas many of these paintings that came out of Rembrandt's studio, and people no longer knew what the difference was.
If I've done my job, it's me that lives inside their fingers. They think and paint like I do. But once they leave, of course, they can go their own way, like I did.
In 1639, there were 2 very significant Italian Renaissance paintings in Amsterdam. And we know that he saw both of them. One was a portrait of a gentleman by Titian, and we know that he saw a painting by an even more famous Italian Renaissance painter, Raphael, which came up for sale in 1639. And he combines that with the Titian to say, I'm a little bit like these people. I stand in the tradition of these great masters. there was this rich tradition called emulation, which meant both imitating people from the past that you admired, but also doing them one better and showing that you had yet this greater ambition. So this year, 1640, was significant for many reasons, personal as well as professional. And with Rembrandt, the personal and the professional are never far apart. This year, as happened frequently during his marriage with Saskia, a child died. And so you have to imagine him holding all these conflicting events and feelings in balance, even as he continues to push his art forward.
Saskia was a very common model in the first years of their marriage. We think this drawing of Saskia in her bedroom with a four-poster bed and curtains was probably drawn about the time that she was expecting their first daughter, Cornelia, in 1638. And the reason we know that she's probably in bed because she's expecting her bed is that it has this nursing couch in the foreground, and that allowed either the mother or the midwife to recline and to nurse the child sort of propped up with cushions. Saskia looks a little bit pallid, a little bit wan. We don't actually know whether it's just before or after the birth. It could well have been. The poor baby was buried within 3 weeks, so it could be that the nursing couch is still there, just needing to be removed.
The infant mortality rate was staggering, but we have so many drawings by Rembrandt of his wife Saskia in these various phases of illness, because she also must have been ill during her pregnancies and during the loss, but also later on drawings of women and children that are so heartfelt and so well observed that that there is no other way than that he must have felt deeply for all the children that were born, and that he must have grieved deeply as well, together with Saskia. And the drawings tell that story. Every human being has the same emotions. We all feel fear, we all feel joy, we all feel sadness. And that is why these drawings especially still speak to us today, because we can see ourselves in them.
3 times now in the Zuiderkerk I've watched them write the simple facts. 15th of February 1636, a child of Rembrandt, painter, Rombertus. He was 2 months old. 13th of August 1638, a child of Rembrandt, painter, Cornelia, named after my mother, 2 weeks old, which was the same age that our 3rd child reached, our 2nd Cornelia, buried on the 12th of August 1640. The good Lord gives, the good Lord takes away. He takes, he takes, he takes. I hear other people talk of profit and loss. Their children sleep at home.
For anyone who has even the remotest emotional attachment to Rembrandt, this painting is like a punch to the gut. By all accounts, the happiest time of Rembrandt's life was the time that he spent with his wife Saskia. By 1641, by the time this painting was made, Saskia has lost 3 children soon after childbirth. The poignancy of this exchange of glances is so deeply, deeply moving. And the flower joins them together in that bond of enduring, sustained hope.
This is a church registration from the Zuiderkerk, which is translated as the Southern Church, the Protestant church which was closest to the Breestraat, where Rembrandt lived. And this is a baptism of the son of Rembrandt and Saskia, 1641, Titus, and the name of the parents, of course, are mentioned, and the date. He was baptized on September 22, 1641. I mean, of course, the son is born. It must be a happy moment, but Rembrandt and his wife Saskia, they lost already 3 children in infancy. And you never know, they never knew if Titus would survive. Birth and death were very close in these ages. This book is a registration of burials of the old church, the most expensive church, you can say, the most posh church of Amsterdam at the time. This is a burial. Saskia van Uylenburgh was buried in the old church on 19th of June 1642. I mean, this is all what is left at the end of your life. You want 2 lines in a volume like this. That's how history works. So Rembrandt had no wife anymore. This is a notary again. And this is the last will of Saskia.
Saskia's will provided for the inheritance of the goods that she had brought into the marriage, and that Titus would have been entitled to inherit from her. And that was, at the time of her death, half of the estate. So what happens if Rembrandt remarries? Under the conditions of Saskia's will, he has to pay Titus half of the estate as it was when Saskia died. And this was worth 20,375 guilders.
I have a son, but no wife. And if I find a wife to be a mother for him, profit and loss. 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 Captain Franz Banning-Kock tells me he wants a likeness of him and his militia company. Here was a picture about the pride of my city, and in the years after I painted it, my face and name were dragged in the mud. Rembrandt the adulterer, the great painter who lost all his money.